thank you so much for joining us today and for choosing this particular breakout session at this year's Goalmakers conference. We're so appreciative of your generous engagement and participation in what continues to be a really busy year, I know, for many of us. My name is Katrina Kwan. I'm a senior project manager at Dalberg Advisors, a social impact-driven strategic advisory firm. As the deputy of our global gender practice, I am really honored and thrilled to be facilitating and moderating this special session. I think all of us on the line can agree that achieving gender equality is one of the most important humanitarian issues of our time. However, many barriers to gender equality often remain hidden, overlooked, and misunderstood. And that's why we're here today. Today, we will hear from a panel of leading women's rights experts on how menstrual health and hygiene, gender-based violence, female genital mutilation, and policy and legal rights have a fundamental impact on the opportunity, dignity, and human rights of women and girls around the world. I won't spend too long on introductions, as our esteemed panelists will speak to their work over the course of this session. But briefly, as a reminder, I'm joined today by Celeste Mergens, CEO and founder of Days for Girls International, Noor Kara, attorney at DLA Piper and New Perimeter, Severina Lemachokoti, board member of the Samburu Women's Trust, and Ina Jurga, the international coordinator for Menstrual Hygiene Day at WASH United. I'll be facilitating questions with our panelists through to around 1:45, but please feel free to send through questions, and we'll be using the final 15 minutes or so for audience Q&A. So with that, I would love to get started, and I'm going to start today's discussion with the same opening question for each panelist, and invite each to share a key barrier to gender equality and how you've seen this barrier impact women in your work. I'll turn it to Celeste to open for us. Thanks, Celeste.
Thank you, Katrina. I actually was actively seeking keys to reversing inequity in my work in global development, and I found a key that was very surprising to me in an unexpected place: menstruation. And I learned that girls were sitting on a piece of cardboard for days at an orphanage and school that I was helping in Kenya, and going without the products they needed and unable to leave the room or go to class. And it was only after I listened to them that I learned that they were being sexually exploited in exchange for a single disposable pad. And that was the moment that Days for Girls was born. What I didn't know was how global this issue is. Today, Days for Girls has reached 2.4 million women and girls in 144 countries on 6 continents. That's how global the lack of adequate menstrual care products, and importantly, the education for what a period is. They were being having lost days because of what they didn't know, but the menstrual resources and the knowledge that goes with it are equally as important. The consequences for people with periods who don't have what they need is not just lost days, it's lost productivity and opportunity. But when coupled with the lack of awareness that menstruation is a natural process of a healthy person, and that this process connects all of us, they can very easily accept traditions that call them untouchable, dirty, unclean, less than. And it turns out that this basic biological function, when addressed, creates more opportunity, gives them back the ability to attend school, be in the workplace, and freedom to be active in their community. And what we've also found is the education leaves them certain that their bodies are remarkable and not a liability. And that can serve as an important turning point for really important conversations in their community themselves. The many prices women have paid all over this world for our failure to talk about periods is astonishing to me. We hear them in places from all over the world. It's so far reaching. But the good news is that the menstrual movement is growing around the world. Organizations and individuals are seeing this as cross-sectional issue is so important to address and are including it, and seeing how much it affects many of the global sustainable development goals. And the best part is that menstrual equity can happen in our lifetimes. And we're seeing communities shift from extreme aversion to talking about menstruation in places where it's so stigmatized that in one case, a girl in Bomet County, Kenya, a place where we've seen such a shift, this girl was menstrual shamed in her classroom, a girl named Jacqueline, and went on to commit suicide directly afterwards. The community then has, after getting the invitation to be ambassadors of health, after a local advocate of Days for Girls, Anita, have gathered everyone in her community to engage them in conversations and an invitation to shift the stigma. They have gone on to have events, to talk about it, to create solutions that work for them, and the entire community engaged in shifting the stigma. We're seeing powerful shifts like that in many communities, and learning that that shift is most effective when it's locally engaged and locally driven. And turns out that menstruation is not just important, it really is one of the keys to vital cross-sectional conversations that are a real game changer for gender equity, health, opportunity, and seeing that they have the opportunity to shift things, to work with their culture, to work with their tradition, and also create better outcomes for their entire community. And this is measurable, achievable, and something we can all easily engage in by speaking up for periods where we are, where we work, and in our communities. And that is one really exciting aspect for me in the fight to create more equity in our world.
Thanks so much, Celeste. And I loved your use of the word, this being a vital cross-sectional conversation. I think that's really what today's breakout is really about. And also for giving us some hope, even though I asked a question about a barrier, and actually you're giving us hope for achieving menstrual equity in our lifetimes. And I think all of us on this call share that, those aspirations. I'd like to turn over to Noor for your opening remarks as well. Same opening question on what gender equality barriers you see in your work. Thanks, Noor.
Sure, thank you, Katrina. It's wonderful to share this platform with my impressive co-panelists today and to be part of this important initiative. My name is Noor Kara. I'm an attorney at the global law firm DLA Piper. I'm very fortunate to work with the firm's pro bono program and our nonprofit affiliate called New Perimeter, which aims to increase access to justice, social and economic development, and sound legal institutions for women's advancement worldwide. So I am a licensed US lawyer. I work directly with individual clients and on research and project development for global communities. My co-panelists and I work on some overlapping issues, but I have also spent much of my time this year representing survivors of domestic violence who are seeking protective orders or restraining orders in the courts. And I also represent immigrants who have fled torture and violence from their home countries and are seeking asylum or other forms of immigration relief in the United States. These areas of law often overlap, as one of my main clients is both an asylum seeker and a survivor of gender-based violence. But in response to your question, Katrina, I first want to say that the term women's equity can be a bit misleading in that the barriers women face actually concern equity for all, for everyone, for the progress of civil society in its entirety, and not just for women. In my work, I continually see how the law and legal services are not always structured to benefit women, which of course not only impacts women, but has cascading impacts on everybody. We know that survivors of domestic violence are disproportionately women, and we know that women disproportionately face the burdens of childcare, caregiving, and often have unequal educational and professional opportunities. But the focus in the courtroom, unfortunately, is on set elements of a crime or a civil charge and set laws of procedure or rules of evidence that apply to everybody. There is very little room to consider the political, economic, psychosocial, and cultural nuances that might affect a female victim survivor's conditions. As an example from my work, I know that different states define abuse in different ways. And sometimes there are different laws corresponding to different forms of abuse. This requires survivors, who we know are mostly women, to either afford a lawyer or have that specific legal knowledge on their own in order to seek the right kind of help. We could discuss countless examples today, but in my work, I see that our legal system and our laws are not adequately built for women. They're very complicated and inflexible and can often deter seeking support and justice. So in our panel today, we're talking about SDG number 5 on gender equality. And when we do, I think we need to acknowledge that discriminatory laws and norms remain pervasive here in the United States as well. We also have to make great progress when it comes to initiating reforms that really do respond to all genders. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Noor. I'd like to now turn the mic to Severina to share more about how she's seen some of the issues of inadequate policy and legal rights in your work. Thanks, Severina.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Severina Lemachokoti, and I'm really humbled to be here and to be in the midst of these great women who are changing the world in different capacities. I'm a survivor of FGM, and I use my story to educate and tell the world the effects of FGM, and just like to try help young girls to say no to FGM. And during my work in Samburu County, the northern part of Kenya, and generally in the whole country, in Kenya and around the globe, I've seen several barriers that hinder girls and women to access to equitable health and mental health services. And we have barriers that we can talk about them on global platforms, and barriers that are, at the grassroots level. So as a campaigner, as an activist at the grassroots level, we have issues like illiteracy, because we have policies, we have laws that our governments and other partners have come up with, but then the problem is the implementation process. Because if our women who are illiterate, who cannot be able to read and write, are given these laws, and policies in form of, hard copies, a book, and they cannot read and write, and they're, we would like them to understand what we talk about, especially when we say we have effects of FGM, and FGM is bad. And as we all know, female genital mutilation, it's a cultural practice in so many communities across the world. And some of the communities use female genital mutilation as their religion practice. So for them to understand that there is somebody else who can be able to write, who is there to write about their culture and tell them that, it's bad to do this. So I see illiteracy and lack of education being a barrier. So what we have to do as partners and as influencers is just to make sure that when we go to the grassroots level, or when we make these policies, we have to put in mind that there are other communities who do not understand what we write. So we have to get a way of them to understand these policies and these laws, so that we can be able to get results of, helping girls and women across the world, especially those who cannot be able to read and write. My other barrier that I've seen over the years is exclusion of community participation. So when we talk about policy making, when we talk about global change, or even when we talk about the sustainable development goals at the national or global level, are we really thinking about the community themselves? Are we thinking about their own cultural practices and their own traditions that, you know, they value? Because we have the positive side of culture and we have the negative side of culture. So how do we involve our communities, our leaders and women and young girls, and so that we can just like listen to their voices and their views during the process of, you know, making these laws and policies, and just, you know, when we want to change them and to change these cultural practice that affect young girls and hinder them from, you know, accessing equitable resources whenever they want. So it's upon us to think about how we have to make our leaders, our cultural leaders, to participate in this process. Because I remember one time I went to the community and I had like around 100 men and women in a small community village in my place, in the Samburu community, and I was talking to them about the Act of 2011 that the government of Kenya started, like, you know, and we were trying to explain to them the effects of female genital mutilation. But one man just stood and asked me, we've never seen the government here. We've never seen the president here. We've never seen any government officer here to, you know, nobody asked us our opinion. So take your books and take it back to the president and tell him that we don't want. So for us to make sure that the community do not rebel from these policies and from these changes, we need to give them a platform for participation. And also the voices of girls needs to be heard strongly. So educating girls and giving them the opportunity to go to school so that they can be able, like, you know, to talk. Because in my community, in most cultures across the world, women are not given an opportunity to talk. They are not given an opportunity to voice their problems. You know, we are asked to keep quiet so that we can be strong. But then how are we going to help these young women and young girls to be strong in their opinions and come out strongly to defend themselves? So those are some of the barriers that I thought about. Of course, we have so many of them. And as a survivor and as an activist of female genital mutilation, there are so many things out there that are barriers, you know, depending with every community and the cultural practices that they have. And, you know, from the global platforms to the village level, we have so many things that we can talk about and try to solve. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Severina, and for painting such a compelling story for why it's so important to have more of these platforms for women and girls' voices and for greater community inclusion and participation. I'm sure these are themes that we will be coming back to in the next 45 minutes or so, but wanted to pass over now to Ina for your opening comments on some of the pervasive challenges that you still see inhibiting progress in your work.
Yes, thank you, Katarina, and also an honor to be part of the Goalmakers, to be part of this panel of amazing other champions, and yeah, really looking forward to this conference. I just want to say that I really fully agree with Severina, and also what Shefa Okoro said in her opening remarks. To break down gender barriers, for me and for many of us, it's really to ensure the voices, equal representation, and decision-making powers of women and girls, as well as other marginalized groups on all levels and all areas in life, at work, and where it matters. Also, just to say, when I talk about gender equality, I mostly talk about women and girls, but also for me, it considers perspectives for LGBTQ and transgender people, and also reverse gender issues in other cases. But mostly, of course, we need to make sure that women and girls have their gender equality perspective met. For me, a key barrier is what I call gender blindness, where like gender dimensions to human development issues, and no matter what we talk about today, are not considered either by default or by unwillingness or by sheer ignorance, right? So, and here I want to give an experience from my personal life. And I'm a civil engineer by profession. And as you can imagine, or you know, a large majority of my colleagues are men who design and construct infrastructure. And I want to make a bridge to what Celeste said about periods. So school toilets have really been neglected to be period friendly for girls because simply men, engineers, never really thought about this. And it was never taught in my engineering school about gendered needs. So also the engineers hardly consulted the adolescent girls on their needs. And in the same time, of course, there's a silence and shame to talk about it. So girls also didn't talk about their problems on such a taboo subject. For example, again, very concretely, where should they dispose their soiled sanitary pads? Or where should they wash their cloth? So this simply wasn't reflected in the design by default, by ignorance or just not knowing. And yeah, so it also took me a while because I never learned that in school. And it was a very opening up for me as a female engineer that I never thought about this in the designs. And now I'm really conscious about this. And also, just paraphrasing Gloria Steinem, if men would have periods, school toilets would have always the best period-friendly design. So I think this is really, but also on a positive note, because the issue is coming to the forefront now. There's also now males and engineers and that put this design standards forward and start to think about menstrual health and hygiene needs. And there are standards and policies. And I think this is just an example how you can turn around like blindness into something when you really are opening up, listen to the voices and break down taboos and stigma. My also perception is that there's a lot of more attention to gender equality and progress has been really made. I think in the last years, we've seen conferences where really and trying to tackle gender equality and address this. And what I'm really excited to see is that there are young people that are claiming their rights and get really loud, for example, on period tax campaigns or on abortion rights or just the Women's March. I mean, it's really, and climate change, I think it's really great to see that young people don't wait for government to take the action and they're there. So again, the issue of voice representation and being able to shake things up. I mean, of course, there are still huge remaining challenges, and as one of the barriers, I have to mention that with the COVID crisis, a lot of progress has been reversed or has even exacerbated some of the challenges of poverty and lack of education, especially around girls. So yeah, there's still a long way ahead, but I'm glad that we're coming together as a force to address this from multiple perspectives.
Thanks so much, Ina, and thank you to all of our panelists for your opening comments. I feel like you've really set the stage for the fundamental importance of these issues, not just for women and girls, but for all genders, all communities, all societies. I'd like to dig a little bit deeper now into some specific reflections and learnings from each of your works. I'll start with Severina this time. You've built community programs and worked extensively with girls and women who've undergone female genital mutilation. Can you share some of the mental and physical consequences of FGM, and also what approaches actually help to prevent FGM and what approaches work to support survivors?
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that question. And when I was reading about the question that was posted earlier, I reflected a little bit because, as a survivor of FGM, there are those triggers. You read a question and you're like, okay, that is me. So let me just talk about what I went through and just tell the world what it is. So there are so many consequences of female genital mutilation, especially depending on the type of the cut, because different communities, different practice FGM differently. So we have different types of FGM. So we have the first type where they only cut a little bit, and then there are communities that chop off everything, and there are communities that chop and stitch. I can't go into details on that because all the effects of a female genital mutilation happens to a young girl who is 9 years old, who is very innocent, doesn't have a voice of her own. And why they practice? It's all because of traditions, cultural practices, and religion. So the first, physical harm is because it's the removal of the genitalia from that young girl's body. So when you grow up as a young girl, you have no idea what they did to your body. So most of the young girls, when they grow up, they discover that, a part of our body was chopped off, and they can't ask why, because it was done when they were still young, and it's a tradition. So they just go on with their lives without even mentioning or even asking about it. The other thing is, like, we have issues like the keloids, cysts, that, these are infections that, pop up during like that period of when a girl is cut and then you're trying to heal, but rather than healing, cysts appear there in your vagina, keloids. And during delivery, because most of our young girls, especially young girls when they are married off, now we link FGM with early marriages, because most of our communities, they use FGM as a key to early marriages. So most of the young girls are taken through FGM so that they can get ready for marriage. They say that FGM is a way of cleansing a girl. It's a way of making that girl grow up and ready for marriage. They say actually a girl will not get married because she's dirty and she's not clean for her husband. So those are some of the reasons. But then we link FGM with early marriages, which causes like very harsh consequences during delivery, because you can imagine a young girl getting married at the age of 9 or 11. She's not developed. Her body is not developed, not ready for a baby. So when she is ready to have a baby, we get stillbirths, children die, and fistula. Cases of fistula happen at that time. So there are so many, consequences of female genital mutilation. But then the problem is women keep quiet. Those young girls keep quiet because the culture stipulates that they are not supposed to talk about their reproductive health issues, because that is what the culture says. So as a survivor and as an activist, there is also an issue of mental problems, because there you are, the pain that happens on that day, it's so severe that it will stick on your mind for the rest of your life. You'll be there thinking about that woman who chopped your body off. You'll be thinking about standing in front of women naked and them damaging your body for the rest of your life. And the pain, the trauma of just having that process, dealing with that process without any medication. And to some extent, some communities, they stitch that lady. So we link also issues on periods to FGM, because if you are cut and your body has been stitched, your vagina is stitched. So during your monthly periods, you can't have your normal periods, because then you get clots in your vagina, and then it turns into infection, and most girls die. So we interlink all these issues with gender-based violence, because that is gender-based violence. So we have the psychological trauma that goes along as long as a survivor lives. So what I recommend us to do, and other partners to do, is to help the survivors and talk to them, include psychosocial support programs in your work. Help the girls go to school so that they can be able to say no to FGM, and we reduce the rates of FGM. Just issues on mental health should be strengthened in organizations, because gender-based violence is something that needs to be addressed holistically. It needs to, we need to use the bottom-up approach also to make sure that women at the grassroots level and women at the global level speak one language. We need to be there for each other. Just, that space of, just talking and appreciating each other. And those who are in pain should be helped. The other thing is safe houses and rescue centers for these young girls, especially those who, like in my community, when we go out there and rescue girls, when we don't have somewhere to take them until like one organization started this, rescue center. And then there are so many of them. And then, the community start like, going against what we do. So it is a process. It is something that we need to come together to help the survivors, especially of FGM, especially go through counseling. I'm a counselor by myself, but I can't counsel myself. I need also somebody else to take me through that. So it's just a collective responsibility at this point. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Severina, and especially for really bringing to light all of the intersections between FGM, child marriage, periods, gender-based violence. I think that's a really helpful to really elevate that point on just how cross-cutting all of these issues are. I'll bring in Noor now. Your research on a number of issues impacting women's equity, as well as representing women who have faced many of these barriers. On what issues have you seen the most progress, and where is there still work to be done?
Thanks, Katrina. Yeah, so I spoke earlier a little bit about protective orders for survivors of domestic violence. And I want to say, while these forms of relief have their flaws, they're very temporary. There's often little enforcement and oversight. I have actually seen progress in how swiftly these matters are adjudicated in the courts, and how many legal aid programs and pro bono lawyers are now stepping up to assist these clients. We know that during the COVID-19 pandemic, there's been a sharp rise in intimate partner violence. And with lockdowns and courts closed, many types of civil cases were delayed or rescheduled. But hearings for protective orders continued virtually, and they did so quite effectively. They were considered emergency matters. So these cases work on very fast timelines. Of course, they're urgent, and there's great risk of violence involved to the victim survivor and also to their family members and their children. So that's one place where I've seen progress. Relatedly, I'm also seeing a lot of law firms and corporations focus more on incentivizing and delivering pro bono assistance to those clients who are most unable to access legal services. I'm a beneficiary of such a program myself at my law firm. Pro se litigants are those who try to represent themselves without any kind of legal training because they can't access a lawyer or they can't afford a lawyer. But they have far lower chances of success. There are lots of stats out there, but it's been estimated that non-detained immigrants are 5 times more likely to seek relief if they have an attorney, and 5 times more likely to obtain the relief that they're seeking with the help of an attorney than those who are unrepresented. So there's great need for attorneys to take on cases pro bono, and I'm very happy to see that this is being further prioritized. A last form of progress that I've seen in recent times is the expanding role of a lawyer. So yes, we do the typical lawyer's work of representing clients in litigation and drafting lots of forms and documents, but I also fortunately get to conduct a lot of legal and policy research when it comes to global issues. So prior to becoming a lawyer, I worked in the public health space, specifically on the issue of menstrual hygiene and WASH, like Celeste and Ina, which enabled me to work on some grassroots programming. But that experience has been extremely useful in my work as a lawyer, because now I know that when I'm working with highly traumatized clients, it's also my obligation to connect them to housing or medical assistance or other social and mental health services that they might need. And I'm also very proud to have recently launched a comparative study with my firm in conjunction with Days for Girls International and Celeste's team, which will analyze the legal policy and programmatic reforms enacted towards menstrual equity in several countries. So all of this only goes to show how expansive the role of law and the role of a lawyer can really be in enacting change and providing culturally sensitive, trauma-informed, and holistic representation, which is very much needed towards achieving gender equity and equality.
Thanks, Noor. Since you mentioned the Menstrual Equity Project with Days for Girls, I'd love to now invite in Celeste. And also, I'm sure Celeste will build in, I'm sure you will build on many of the points that Severina has raised around shattering, the importance of shattering the stigma around menstruation, and why it's so critical to addressing the roots of gender equity, roots of gender inequity rather. Can you share more about the impacts of that stigma on girls, and what are some effective approaches for combating this stigma?
Yes, now you did it. This is such a culturally intricate subject, and as globally taboo as it is transformative, and it holds such rich opportunity to make a tremendous difference, as you've seen the cross-cultural and cross-sector indicators. Periods really are pivotal, and around the world, many may lack what they need to stay engaged with confidence for fear that they'll have a stain, or that they'll use something that can cause infection or discomfort. And it's a problem almost everywhere, in every community. It's a problem where you live, guaranteed, anywhere that people have to choose between period products and other necessities like food or shelter. Period products often are the last to be used because they'll use something alternative like toilet tissue or a cloth that's unsecured, or leaves or bark, or corn cobs, newspaper, cow dung, single-use pads that they rinse out and then put on a windowsill to dry for the night and try again, to use it again, and rinsing things out and just making it work, innovating whatever she has to do so she can get her days back. And these solutions are often so unreliable and leave it difficult to sit down, to be with others, to be in a classroom. And in some places, it's even more severe. In some places like Western Nepal, you're completely considered untouchable. You're not allowed to be in your home or the pathway to home. You're in a shed with the cattle. You're at risk of snake bites or exposure. This is Nepal, and women die just trying to live through their periods. And in a community in Guyana, South America, Days for Girls Ambassador of Health called Abiola was ostracized because she was found to be working every day. And in her community, a banana blight had just broken out, and they were trying to decide why it had started, and they decided it was her fault because she had to have been menstruating during one of those days, and it determined that's why the banana blight happened. So imagine in her community, she took the opportunity to be educated, became an ambassador to teach not just the women, but everyone, and was able to be freed from that experience, and her whole community freed from that misunderstanding. And it literally inviting the community and having them engage the community is the key. But the benefits to doing that are actually more than that. I was once in northern Uganda, Gulu, Uganda, and a woman named Christine I had the pleasure of sitting down with, and she has a Days for Girls enterprise, engaging and hiring people to do Days for Girls and to make products and do the education. And I asked her how it was affecting her life, what was working, what was not working, and her response still stays with me today. She said, people know who I am and they listen to me. My children can go to school and we eat every day. What struck me was that her answer wasn't, we eat every day first. Her answer first was, people know who I am and they listen to me. Voice, it really matters, having a voice. And women and girls often are not given that opportunity. So imagine it's around something you've been stigmatized for. Imagine that you get to engage in this shift, and imagine how much that means to her core. And the truth is that being able to reduce the stigma, lose the shame about your body, and have the opportunity to lead the way are powerful keys for equity for women. And lastly, if I can just share, because it's so good, so I've got to share it, a message that came in from Malawi. So this is from a friend named Yami Kami. She's an ambassador of health in Malawi. And this is a place in the rural areas, particularly, where you're dusted off when you start menstruating. And as Severina shared, it's considered that you need to be ritually cleansed because you just started your period. And you're ritually cleansed by elder man in your community who has sex with you, putting you at risk of pregnancy and infection to purify you. And they report being very frightened by how it's done. So she's gone to this community and she's working with girls and explaining what a period is. And here's what she says. As the team was packing up to go after our kickoff event in Chilambando Primary School ground, a group of boys lingered around, and one of the girls that had attended our Ambassador of Health training and received her kit was walking past the boys. Walandia Kundundu. I said that wrong, I'm sure. You have received a package. One of the boys called out. His friends jeered rudely. The girl was not embarrassed. Instead, she faced them and said to their face, Lalandiri Komeni, yes, I have received. I will proudly carry it without shame because I have learned today that menstruation is not something to be ashamed of. I need to embrace it and be proud of it because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. She then strolled away, a victory smile on her face. This made our team so proud to know we've made a huge impact on the life of a girl who could be so brave. That is what can happen in communities where girls go through horrible things, difficult things, just because of who they are, because of a basic biological function, not just the opportunity to get your days back, not just health, not just confidence and strength, but leadership, opportunity, surety, and voice, built of solutions owned by the community themselves. If we miss the key of menstrual equity, what other keys are we looking for? And one guarantee I know to my core is that when we fearlessly choose to give them the authority, them the gift of the education, them the power, and listen to them to know how they want to engage in that, shifts happen.
Thank you so much, Celeste, for sharing such moving testimonies and inspiring ones at that. I'd love to bring in Ina now to build on Celeste, your comments, as menstrual hygiene and equity is a key part of your work as well at WASH United. Can you tell us what WASH stands for and why it has an impact on gender equity?
Thanks, Katerina. And yeah, powerful examples before. WASH stands for water, sanitation, and hygiene. And so very clearly, so if you look at the global numbers, they're daring for each and everyone, no matter if boy, girl, man, or women. 1 in 4 people lack safely managed drinking water in their homes, and half of the world's population lacks safely managed sanitation, a toilet. And as you can imagine, we're still in a pandemic and everybody talks about washing hands with soap. But at the beginning of the pandemic, only 3 in 10 people, could not wash their hands with soap and water in their homes because they didn't have water or they didn't have soap and no hand washing facilities. But I really want you all now to look a little bit behind these numbers, and I want to ask for your imagination what gender lens to wash actually means. So imagine you're a young woman in Africa and you need to walk twice a day for at least 1 hour to the nearest borehole. Do you think you have time for an education or find work? Imagine you live in India and you have no toilet at home, and every morning and evening, when it's still dark, you step outside into the nearby field to urinate or to make your bigger business, and you don't see what's surrounding you. Aren't you feeling scared? Imagine you're in a refugee camp and have to share your toilets with many others, including boys and men. Would you feel safe? And imagine you're pregnant and your local hospital has no steady supply of clean water and soap. What would you do? And my last imagination question for you is, imagine that you're a transgender person, no matter where, but which toilet would you choose and feeling not stigmatized? So these are just some simple examples, but I think we all see from our daily life and from our experience that women and girls have a higher burden to ensure clean water, sanitation, and hygiene at home and for the entire family. And at the same time, they're also more negatively impacted by the lack of it. They need good personal hygiene, especially during menstruation, or if they have a female genital mutilation, or if they're pregnant. And then their risk of gender-based violence because of lack of toilets and stepping outside. So for me, it's really, really clear that WASH requires a gender transformative lens, because then it really benefits, and there are multiple benefits, like women have more time to earn income, girls are more likely to attend schools, and family health and hygiene improves. So, and this is all interlinked, right? So water and sanitation is a human right, and it also has a dedicated sustainable development goal that is number 6. Today we're talking about 5 and 10, but it definitely, if you achieve the SDG number 6, and you also think about it has a ripple effect on SDG 5 and 10, and then it will benefit the entire society.
Thank you so much, Ina, and thank you to all of you for sharing such powerful stories and reflections and bringing in such diverse and nuanced global perspectives, whilst also recognizing and highlighting the widespread universality of some of these issues across countries. I think it is so important that we shed light on some of these cultural nuances, whilst also championing the fact that these are global challenges in scale and why transformative and collective change is necessary. With that, I'd love to turn to the final question for all of you from me before we turn to audience questions. And I might ask you all to keep your answers a little bit shorter, so we have so we still have a decent amount of time for audience questions. The final question from me is, to advance women's equity, what are some of the changes that need to be made? What should we address now as we have global attention to build back better? I will turn the mic to Ina first.
Thanks. I tried to be brief. So very clearly, I mean, we all see that this is very interlinked, what we talked about today, like from menstrual hygiene and menstrual health to WASH to female genital mutilation to the rights and legal aspects of it. So, but just way too often we work too much in silos and don't exchange on other issues. So this is a perfect platform, and let's continue to collaborate and break down the sectoral barriers, because we all strive for gender equality. Just 2 small aspects as well. I think it's great to collect also data. So gender sensitized or segregated data. So we can help to make the case for gender equality, make challenges visible, but also the effectiveness of progress and change. And yeah, be committed. And my last point is to be prepare for the long haul. There will be tensions and along the way and so on. So just it might take time, but I truly believe we can change cultures and deeply enshrine gender stigmatizing norms, because then it will be, as we all say, we transform the life of women and girls, and with it the entire society.
Thanks, Ina. Over to Noor. What should we address now?
Well, I think we've all highlighted so many changes today that really do need to be addressed. But I'd like to underscore what we've all talked about, which is gender-based and intimate partner violence. We know that there's been a sharp rise during these last 2 years due to the pandemic. And, you know, we've called it a shadow pandemic. There is global attention on it right now. But the pandemic did not cause gender-based violence. And so it exacerbated it. But now that we have global attention, we really do need to keep the pressure and momentum on this issue. And we must address it now and even after the pandemic passes. And as Severina mentioned earlier, and as all of us have actually, I think we will achieve progress when we get interdisciplinary stakeholders involved. We need bipartisan support when it comes to legislation. We need medical, psychosocial, legal, law enforcement, and policy advocacy advocates working together. This is how we'll enact sustainable change. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that with education and training programs and curricula, we need all genders involved. This is not a women's issue. This is not just about women's equity. It's for everyone to be involved in this fight.
Thanks, Noor. Over to you, Severina. What do you think we should be addressing now?
Thank you so much. I think we've touched almost everything because as we all spoke about our different topics, we kind of like highlighted what we think should be done, especially on issue of partnership. Because right now we just need to be together. We need just to be on the same page to make sure that we deliver what we say. And the other thing I would really like to stress is funding. If organizations that are doing amazing and incredible jobs at the work at the grassroots level and globally can get funds to continue working with the communities to change the lives of women and girls, and any other support that they may need, then that will be a great thing that we need to focus on right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Severina. And over to you, Celeste.
We need to strategically create opportunities for women to hold leadership, and that's meaningful, to be part of decision-making committees and leadership positions that lend their wisdom and perspective to the community. And yet so often they're not invited, even though, as Noor referred to earlier, in emergency settings, in places where they are made the primary caregiver and left to do that, they're still not, their needs and their input is not actively pursued. It's vital to seek their wisdom and input and create solutions that give them opportunities for leadership. Right now, there's pressure, in my opinion, that to move women into an all-encompassing gender bucket. But our work to elevate the opportunities and leadership of women is not finished. And women's leadership and voice really matters. So the more we can include entrepreneurial solutions in that formula, the more it will be able to grow and sustain itself and be more balanced so that everybody's voice is at the table. And that purposeful strategy to create those kinds of solutions that they need, that include their input in design and decision-making and local leadership, is an important model for every sector to develop and will make a tremendous difference.
Thank you so much, Celeste, and to all of our panelists. This has been a really great discussion so far, and thank you all so much for your inspirational comments and stories. I'm going to turn us now for the final 10 minutes to audience Q&A. We have had one question come in from Jennifer. how can we best engage boys and young men in these conversations? I can see Severina has jumped off mute straight away. So over to you, Severina, but then we'll invite others in.
Okay, thank you so much. That question is a very good one because when we talk about women and girls and gender-based violence and anything to do with gender, most of the times men think that we are excluding them. But right now, we are kind of like trying to make sure that they understand that they are part of the process. And I give an example of female genital mutilation. Traditionally, in my community and most communities across the world, they don't talk about female genital mutilation or any other women issue in front of men. But right now, for us to implement this program and to make sure that we educate our community, we do it collectively. We have programs that just focus on boys because they are the ones who will marry these uncut girls in the future. Men are responsible to protect their young girls because they are fathers of these daughters. And they're the ones who will be crying because their women will be suffering from mental issues because of female genital mutilation, early marriages, and other harmful cultural practices. So right now, we are seeking and hoping that most organizations include men to be activists, to be educators, to start mobilizing the community, to start programs with young men and boys in schools, to include FGM and other harmful cultural practices in the curriculum in different capacities so that they can also feel included in this process. So, yes, men are very important and boys are very important in this process when you talk about women and girls equity. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Severina. Any other panelists want to come in on this question?
Yes, with Days for Girls, we're finding the same thing. We have a Men Who Know program because really any cultural shift has to include us all. And it's really powerful to make an issue that's seen as separate be inclusive of everybody in the community. So I'm all in and completely agree with Severina.
Any of our other panelists? Otherwise, I think we have one other audience question that has come through. I'll ask that one. How do we address the gender equality issue being a grassroots level NGO without getting into activism?
I think to that, I can say quickly that I think activism gets a bad rep in terms of what it means and what it is. And I completely understand that in certain political, cultural contexts, activism may not be the right approach. But I think reframing it in terms of education or providing program implementation, drafting, trainings, these are forms of activism that I think a lot of grassroots NGOs can implement without coming across as being involved in this politicized term of activism. It is very much an act towards change to be able to implement training programs and curricula that can work very much at the grassroots level and to involve local leaders, the idea of localization in that change.
And maybe I can just give a practical example also. Then from India back then, for example, menstruation was so much a taboo. Even for programs, it was difficult to say you wanted to work on menstruation because then you were seen as an activist talking about sexual things. So there was an entry point that you talked, we're doing wash for girls. So that was kind of the door opener where you weren't perceived as an activist, but what you actually did in your programs was you talked about gender issues, but it wasn't necessarily perceived as that. And yeah, I would also then agree with Noor. If you localize it and if you work with your local groups and you're at the grassroots and that's where you are excelling, what you do is activism, but you don't have to call it that way, and just use your local wisdom and knowledge and connections to slowly work on the issues that you're passionate about.
Okay, just to add on that, thank you so much. You know, in most communities, it's very true. They perceive activism on a negative way, or they think that an activist is a destroyer. But if we kind of like try to think that an activist is a positive reinforcer of these programs that NGOs start in the community in a positive way, because if an activist knows what she or he is doing at the grassroots level, just to make sure that the voices and education that needs to get in the community gets there. And you know, in communities that have these traditions that hinder women from speaking up, if we have an activist in that community, they will help in, you know, in that process of speaking up and just talking about their problems. So yeah, NGOs, if they strengthen their programs and help the communities and work with activists in a positive way, then I think that will help you know, the whole community. So then that you will, you know, kind of like, you'll be able to differentiate the NGO and activism at the same time. It's just how do you implement your programs at the grassroots level? Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you. I just wanted to check for any final questions from our audience members. I think we have 3 minutes left, so happy to take one more question if anything comes through. I'll give it 30 seconds and then I will make some closing remarks. Okay, I'm seeing nothing coming through. So maybe I will share some closing remarks and actually firstly thank all of our panelists for giving up your time, sharing your stories, giving us hope and inspiration for the path forward. I think we can all agree what we've covered today in a very short space of time has been the fact that we've highlighted that some of these issues that are often overlooked, hidden, and misunderstood are actually, firstly, deeply intersectional. I think many of our panelists have really shared just how linked child marriages with FGM, with gender-based violence, and I think that is just so important. I think our panelists have also really highlighted how global these issues are and how universal and widespread they are. But also what has been terrific about having such a diverse panel with such diverse experiences that whilst these issues are global, there are cultural peculiarities. And I think that that has also really come to the fore in today's discussion. And then I would also say that the panelists have really shed light on the fact just how important these issues are, not only for women and girls, but for all genders, and also for all SDGs. I think that has also come out very clearly. We're not just talking about SDG 5 here. And then lastly, I would just like to thank all the panelists for sharing practical and really inspiring community-led, inclusive possibilities for the future. I think I leave this discussion personally with hope and real optimism for change. So thankful to all of you for joining us on this journey and being part of it. Thank you so much, and thank you to all of you for your time today.